Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to Spirituality TV. We are in the second part of a conversation with Father Martinez Cawley, Trappist monk priest, formerly of Pecos, New Mexico, from the late 40s through the mid-50s, before they moved to Oregon in their present location in Lafayette, Oregon. I invite you to wait for the credits and check the website out and to find out more about the Trappists while they were here in New Mexico, as well as their present life in Oregon. Also, Father Martinez is the author of many books, including Guadalupe, the Pecos years, when they transformed the former Dude Ranch into a monastery, and now it's a monastery to this day as a Benedictine monastery. So welcome back, Father Martinez.
Thank you, Bill.
It was a pleasure in that first segment to get to know you and to find out about your life. Let me see if I can recap it. You were born and raised in Australia.
Yes.
And whereabouts in Australia again?
In Perth.
In Perth.
And also in the country town of Wagen.
In Wagen, right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you were part of that big wave of young men who went into religious life after World War II,
yes.
Although you were not a veteran, but many were. And that's what sponsored the movement to the monastery in Pecos, because your original Trappist monastery became so full they had to have some place to put them, and so that's how the Lord led you out here.
Yeah.
So I recommend for any of those who are interested to get a hold of this book. You can get it at the monastery in Pecos through Dove Publications or from the monastery in Oregon, which are both named Our Lady of Guadalupe Abbey. And perhaps that's a good place to start, to tell us, how did the name Our Lady of Guadalupe Abbey come to be, and how was that abbey named as such?
Well, it began just after Archbishop Byrne invited us to New Mexico. They read at their meals in the monastery in Rhode Island, where we came from, a book that had just come out on Guadalupe. It was called The Grace of Guadalupe, by Francis Parkinson Keyes, who was quite a novelist. So one of the monks, Father Bede, a great friend of the Poor Clares of Roswell in later years, he wrote to her, and it's a long story, but so they became friends, and she decided to give us all the royalties of her book. So, but in the meantime, they had to find a name for the monastery. And by that time, the monks had been so pleased with the book of Francis Parkinson Keyes that they insisted it could be nothing other than Guadalupe. And when we moved to Oregon, my novice master said, if we're going to change that name, I'm not going to Oregon. So that was how we got it.
Well, she is the patroness of the Americas, Our Lady, and a very unique apparition of Our Lady. And perhaps those who are not familiar with Marian apparitions, perhaps you can give us a little background, because you were the first of the Our Lady of Guadalupe Abbey. So tell us a little bit about Our Lady of Guadalupe and her importance.
Yes, well, there's all sorts of historical approaches that can be taken. To me, the important thing, after all the disputes that have gone on, is to concentrate on the literature of Guadalupe, especially the early writers and the early poets. And of all the early writings, the most beautiful, of course, is the Nican Mapoa.
What is the Nican?
The Nican Mapoa, that is the story in the Aztec language. Somehow I heard that there was a wonderful man down in Mexico in the 40s, Monsignor Angel Garibay. I'm sure he was very aware of the historical issues involved, but instead of attacking them head on, he changed over and went to the literary beauty and especially the theological depth of this wonderful narrative. And so when they kicked me out of all my jobs at one time in the monastery, I had a lot of spare time, so I learned the Aztec language. And I thought the one thing I could do, having a bit of a reputation as a poet, was to try to capture the style of that language, the beauty of it. Maybe the best thing is to read a couple of little passages. Yeah. This is how, very literally from the Aztec, trying to capture the rhetoric and the poetry of it. This is how Juan Diego expresses when he asks Our Lady to let him off from having to go to the bishop, and after all the disappointments. He says, "Thus do I beg of you, my sovereign, O woman, my maiden, that it be one of the esteemed gentry, one whose countenance is recognized, whose countenance is revered, who himself is held in honor. Let it be on him that you enjoin it. Let it be he that bears it, that carries it, this utterance, this declaration of yours, that it be believed. For I am indeed pitiably poor, for I am harness, for I am hod, for I am all haunches, all elbows, for I am of the dispossessed, for I am a pack carrier. For it is not mine to exist there, it is not mine to set foot there. There where you bid me to go. O my maiden, my littlest one, milady, O woman, please do grant me pardon, that I be troubling your countenance, your heart, that I be stepping, that I be stumbling into your frowning annoyance, into your rightful wrath, milady, O my sovereign."
That's lovely. Now that you translated that from the Aztec?
Imitating it as carefully as all the repetition of syllables that occurs, as in early Latin Christian poetry, adoramus te, benedicimus te, glorificamus te, gratias a te. It's the same kind of a thing.
Who wrote that originally in Aztec?
Well, it seems to be from two sources, and the very poetic parts are Antonio Valeriano.
Who was?
He was the governor of the Indians, and he was very eloquent, extremely eloquent, trained by the Franciscans, deeply immersed in the gospel, yet also speaking entirely, not in biblical terms, but in the terms of his own eloquence.
What year was that written then?
Probably in the 1590s. As governor, they were doing a fundraising to build a new church at Tepeyac, and they were for the fundraising. They engaged him to tell the story to the people, and so he told it this way.
Refresh the people's memory about the Guadalupe story, just briefly.
Well, as it was, there's the story of Juan Bernardino, the healing of Juan Bernardino, and also the story of the miraculous image. And they were brought together, especially by, gradually they were brought together. And so when it's all put together, you have Juan Diego, this very humble little man, going to catechism, to Mass and catechism. And he, as he goes, he hears this beautiful music, and he looks and wonders what it is. It's expressed beautifully by Valeriano. And then Our Lady appears to him amid all these birds singing and everything. And she tells him that she wants a church. She wants a building where the people can come and experience her loving kindness. And then there's the struggle with the bishop, that the bishop does, he doesn't give credit. And so Juan Diego comes back and begs off, and then he's supposed to come back again. The bishop wants a sign, and then his uncle gets sick, and he comes back again. And finally, Our Lady gives him these roses, these wonderful flowers on the barren mountain. And he goes to the bishop and spills the roses, but then they discover on his cloak, his toma, they discover the picture. And so then there's a great procession, and they all come out and they set up the little shrine and they put the picture there, and that's what we honor today. So that's the
yeah, and so procession was another one of the areas that you were here talking about.
Yes, that's right. Well, I'm going very much into the personality of the early poets and the early writers, but also the early ceremonial, of which, to me, the procession is the great thing. That's what made them so ecstatic. And we have a beautiful poem, the first thing ever published about Guadalupe in 1634. It's a very long poem, and it's not clever in its rhyme or in its rhythm. It's just clever in its, not clever, but just wonderful in its sincerity. The man really conveys his experience. And as they did in those days, he addresses the picture as Our Lady in person. Now you have, some theologians that object to that, but it was something that was well accepted in the church. And so I gave a talk on that at the university yesterday, and it's the university wants me to get all these early poems, put them into English, and they will publish them. So
And that's why you happen to be here now.
Yes, that's
you were
why I
speaking
was
at the University of New Mexico.
yes, and I took breakfast with the men of the
Yeah.
press, and
Was that a good experience for you, having an opportunity to share some of this with them?
It was. There were some disputed matters in the conference, but there was a kind of an overkill and things like that, and taking the thing from the community and making it a very individual thing. Some of the feminists and so on. I don't want to get into those disputes.
No, but I would like you to talk a little bit about just your experience. I mean, you've been a monk for over 50 years, monk and a priest, and now in the old days you didn't even speak.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to speak. And then you went to Rome and you were trained in Rome, and you said your scholasticism and you began to really learn and grow.
Yes.
What is it like for you now to come out and to share in public settings or with lay people and to convey? Are you well received, or is it a good experience for you?
Yes. Let me just say that I'm preparing a book on Anglo-Guadalupanism, and
What would that be, Anglo-Guadalupe?
well, it's Guadalupe is experienced by Anglos. There's not the patriotism there. In my homeland, Australia, it's all just the pro-life movement. Our Lady is the patron. But for me, I've got into contact with some wonderful people. One lady who had no kidney, or virtually no kidneys, and yet she lives a very full life on the strength that she gets from Our Lady of Guadalupe. And others that have had wonderful experiences, recovering from alcohol through Our Lady of Guadalupe.
So in other words, miracles, in effect, are still taking place as a
Yes.
result of devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Exactly.
Or to Mary in any of her Marian apparitions.
But especially Guadalupe.
Especially
Well, because our monastery is Guadalupe.
Sure.
But rather than talk about the far away and the long ago,
Yes.
I want to speak about the presence of Our Lady in the here and now. With regard to the past, I will take the personality of the author of a book or of a poem or of an interview or whatever they had in those old days, and I will try to study his personality, but especially his spirituality. And the other day I was at the Basilica, and I went up to communion.
Where? In Mexico?
Yes, in Mexico City, the Basilica. And so as I went up to communion, I was with the lady in front of me was just half my stature, and I thought, these are the little people that Our Lady deals with. I want to be in harmony with them. The same way when I gave a talk yesterday on processions as the great expression of Guadalupe, it's that thing of being absorbed into the humble people that pray to Our Lady. I find it a real abuse of Guadalupe, where you take Our Lady as the role model and you dress yourself up in and go jogging, and that you're an individual, absolutely free, without brothers and sisters, without children, invoking. You become Our Lady. That you become what you should become is Saint Juan Diego. You should take that. I am harness. I am hod. I am a pack carrier. I am all haunches. That's the gospel approach. The servant of all. My very dear friend and collaborator, Father Francisco Miranda Godinez, with whom I was staying in Mexico, he took me out to an Indian village, and there I found such wonderful Guadalupan people. There was the old judge there, an absolute delight. The decoration of the church, the way they did it with love, the candles, the way they dressed up the statues, it was just wonderful. And I thought, I want to be one of these, I've done all this scholarly work. I'm a bookbinder. I'm a monk, but I want to be one of these.
So you relate to the people as well. And
yes.
So in other words, you're
I don't have a pastoral gift. I couldn't be their pastor. I just admire and love them, and that's why I love Guadalupe. I want to be part of that. Like one man said in 1556, he said, out at Guadalupe, there's no entertainment. There's no amusements. There's no taverns, nothing to do except to be with Our Lady. It's that presence, and that's what I find. One lady told me about my own mother, who was also loved Guadalupe, that she was so like Our Lady. Not that she was trying to take Our Lady as a role model, and she was going to be the big free woman and all that, but rather she just had that humility. Behold, the handmaid of the Lord.
Just out of curiosity, how does Our Lady of Guadalupe differ from the other apparitions of Mary, such as Fatima and Lourdes and the others that are probably more well known in Europe and elsewhere?
Yes.
How would you characterize the difference? Or as Our Lady in Medjugorje, who is currently appearing.
Well, the big thing about Fatima and even Lourdes to some extent, especially La Salette, and I think Medjugorje, I don't know much about it, they have messages. Whereas Guadalupe is just an invitation and a presence. Our first abbot, Dom Columban Hawkins, was a great Guadalupano. He'd first been a great devotee of Fatima, and Fatima has that element of prophet of doom and so on. And he loved Our Lady of Guadalupe because she was a sort of a counterbalance to that. But myself, I've not been involved in those other devotions, but I've just lived with Our Lady of Guadalupe all these years. And
tell the people how you have benefited personally in your spiritual life, and what have you seen because of a devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe?
I think what I should tell there is that in 1965, because I'm hopeless as a teacher, and someone else took charge of the bindery and didn't want me to be the foreman anymore, and so they kicked me out of all my jobs. And I had just been reading about, it was a book, a 3-volume book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and so I got into all the suffering of Auschwitz, and I thought, here am I kicked out of my jobs, and all this self-pity, and there are these people in Auschwitz. So it came the feast, a few days later, it came the Feast of Guadalupe. And so I thought, well, although I'm in a bad mood and everything, I'm going to go to a hilltop shrine and I'm going to visit Our Lady. So as I went up, I suddenly remembered that I just received from Mexico City the complete text of this beautiful poem of 1634. I thought, now it's ages since I did any poetry. I should translate that. And a moment later, things began to turn over in my mind. All this loneliness I was experiencing, I suddenly discovered what it was not to have a wife. I'd come in as a young boy. So as I just took step after step, and I had a little notebook from my days as foreman in the bindery. So I took that out and I started writing things down, and by the time I got to the hilltop, I had a complete poem there in a style I'd never used, and it was all about Guadalupe, and about what Guadalupe meant to me walking through that forest, and remembering Auschwitz, remembering my loneliness, remembering my celibacy, and but especially remembering my brothers in the monastery. I remember, I don't know the thing by heart, but there was something, the Guadaluping, sort of a gerund there, Guadaluping fellows do, will last forever. I forget the exact wording, but it all wound up into the spirit. Although I was alone, I was going to the shrine that we all shared, and that was the transformation of my life. I've been kicked out of my jobs, but I gave the text to the abbot, and he was not much for poetry, but he recognized that there was something there. So he put me to work in the guest house washing the dishes, and lo and behold, by sheer providence, there comes up a shy young man just before Christmas, and he says, "Is there a Christmas service?" And I say, "Yeah." And then within minutes, we knew we were both poets. And then I met other poets. I met a young woman, among others. It was fortunately nothing inappropriate happened, but we've been lifelong friends. And it was then that I learned to relate to people, to fit in, and it really transformed my life completely. And so
Our Lady was a big part of your emotional and spiritual and psychological development.
And also my thought life. My scholarship, and
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I'm sure a lot of people wonder about the life of a monk, and it sounds to me that in that moment you made a transition. You had to accept the fact that you were never going to marry or have a family of your own. Talk a little about that transition. I know a lot of people would wonder about the life of a celibate monk and the beauty of it. I mean, they can imagine the loneliness at times, but can you talk a little about how that process worked out in your life?
Well, it became... over in Rome, we had to get up at 2:00, and then we went to the university. We went through all these long classes and everything, and come back at 1 o'clock, and then we'd eat, and it became, you could get extremely tense from all that. And then when you tried to sleep at night, you'd have all sorts of sexual temptations, and it became very difficult to deal with. And then all of a sudden, there turned up 3 young women they were family friends from Australia. And I just couldn't get them out of my mind, for ages. So I launched into an enormously long poem. It was largely about Guadalupe. And that was my salvation, that I gradually pulled through, and, everything began to balance out.
So in modern psychological terms, would you say you're getting in touch with your anima or your feminine nature? Was it allowed to come out?
I guess you could say that. I don't think in those terms. But another thing that was enormously helpful, they sent me to psychologists and all that, which was a lot of money and not much help. But Ira Progoff's intensive journal, that was something, because in the extreme silence of a Trappist monastery, where I was so shy that I couldn't really confide in my novice master and so on. So I didn't have that friendship. But once I found those friends in the guest house, that was very different, when I could really express myself. And then I began to have friends in the monastery also, and that was an enormous help. It doesn't need the sexual part, but it does need the heart to heart, and the sharing the values. Then when I was in Jerusalem, we were going through the Sinai Desert on the back of the truck, and after 2 weeks of the desert, begin to get on one another's nerves. But there was one Holy Cross Father from Notre Dame. He and I became great friends, and we're friends still, and he's been transferred to Portland, Oregon, and so we get together quite often. There we were able to find, we shared things, and he wanted to become a Trappist actually, but the abbot eventually decided that he belonged with Holy Cross, and he's done marvelous work with them. But somehow he came to our monastery for a little while, and I don't know how he did it, but somehow the way was paved so that I could get into monastic history and could get in with the scholars and so on, and I finally ended up with his book from Brepols.
Yeah. So you wrote this book.
Well, this is our nuns, the Trappistines, asked me to translate the lives of the early nuns, and they, a professor in Chicago heard about it and wanted them to publish it. So that's brought me into the scholarly world, and all my frustrations have disappeared. I got more fulfillment than I can.
So now that once you found yourself, then all these things, because that's the key, is to find yourself in life, whatever it is, so you can pour your heart and soul into it. Otherwise, the temptations are greater or more of a distraction.
The frustration could be terrible. But the monastery was evolving at the same time. When I first came back from Jerusalem, there didn't seem to be a place for me in the monastery, to fit me in, so that I could, really use my talents and yet be of help to the monastery and to people. But since then, it has, and also I do have skills as a bookbinder, and so I'm very much appreciated on that. Mm-hmm. And among other things, I always had the reputation of being tone deaf. So being in choir, fortunately, I've always loved poetry, so the poetry of the liturgy. But in recent years, we've had a marvelous singing teacher by the name of, I'm hopeless on names, but I can't remember his name. Right. But anyway, what he did was he set us up in choir with an empty stall between us, so we're not worrying about upsetting the man next to us. The result is that I can sing freely now without all that nervousness. And so the result is that people appreciate the singing, and also it's the pleasure of it is fascinating. Well,
we only got a few minutes left, but I want you to share a little bit about your priesthood and the difference in you. You were a monk, and the changes becoming a priest and a monk. Was that
yes,
dramatic?
Well, we were phasing out the priesthood. Our monastery was slower to phase it out. I was one of the few that didn't really want to be a priest, but I thought my parents would be so upset they just would not understand it. I just wanted to be a monk. My brother wanted to be primarily a priest, but a monk in order to be a priest. But so I went along with Providence, and I really enjoyed the private mass that we used to say, but I didn't take my role for singing the mass because I had the reputation of not being able to sing. But when dear old Father Felix turned 80, he was getting forgetful. So they needed a substitute, and they asked me would I do it. And so I agreed to do it. And I had all sorts of objections to the way they were doing it. I thought it was badly planned and all. But somehow I broke through all that. And so I really enjoy my role at Mass now. And there are some that make fun of monks being priests and all. But to me, that intimacy that you get, playing the role of Christ in that assembly with all those wonderful people, especially the marvelous guests we have, our friends of the monastery, it's just a tremendous experience. I just cannot understand why people don't go to Mass, like some of my cousins. It's just such a marvelous experience to be part of that, part of something that's been going on all these centuries, and it's...
I agree with you.
Sure.
For those who don't go, what advice do you have? We only got 2 minutes left. What advice would you have for people out there based on your life, 50 years as a monk and a priest? Just briefly, what would you tell them to do?
I would tell them, if they could possibly find a place where the Mass is done with great love and with a certain amount of musical talent, but above all with fervor in there, so that they experience the Mass to the full once or twice, and then rediscover that same reality in their own parish. I think that would be the advice I would give. It does need a lot of thought and a lot of, you really have to get into it. This whole movement of perpetual adoration, I think, is wonderful. People talk about it should be the liturgy of the word and so, but to be part of a roster of people that will keep a guard of honor in their church night and day, it's wonderful.
I hate to leave it there. I could talk with you all day, Father. Thank you for coming in. We've run out of time. I want to thank you for viewing. Please stay tuned for the credits. Look up, Father, the Trappist Monastery in Lafayette, Oregon. You can go to Google search and find it, or you can look in our credits, or go to the Benedictine Monastery here in Pecos locally, but find some place for yourself where you can get a little deeper flavor of this. I'm indebted to Father Martinez Cawley for coming and tell us about the Trappists in New Mexico and to share with us some of the wisdom that he's gained. So on behalf of everyone here at Spirituality TV, I'm Bill O'Donnell. Thank you for viewing, and stay tuned next week at this time for another program on spirituality.